I want to just start by introducing our two speakers. So we have Chelsea Zhang, who's an investor at Equal Ventures, and Michelle Liao, who's a co-founder at DayZero. Her other co-founder is over here as well. And if the two of you could just start to introduce yourself and talk about your organizations at a high level, just to level set for everyone. And then we're going to take a journey through the fundraising process. We're going to go back and forth between the two to hear their perspectives. So Chelsea, you want to start?
Hi everyone, I'm Chelsea, principal at Equal Ventures. We are a $100 million seed fund, so we are writing around $2.5 to $3 million checks into the seed stage. So I think it is important to set the context that when we invested in Michelle and Julia, we're investing out of Fund 1, where our check sizes were smaller. So we invested $1.5 million into their $2 million pre-seed round last July, August, I think that was end of summer. We are now deploying out of a bigger seed fund, and I will talk about this later. It actually does change some of the dynamics. For us, we are super concentrated. We write 4 checks a year. We like to get ownership and then double down. I only cover commerce and supply chains, and these ladies were working on something that is very, very within scope for us. And we're generally a very thesis-driven fund.
Thanks, Chelsea. My name is Michelle. I am one of the co-founders of DayZero. We're an all-in-one finance platform for e-commerce and CPG businesses. Essentially, I like to think of us as building the next financial operating system for this space specifically. So we're starting out with a better version of QuickBooks, an automated general ledger that makes your statements way faster, lets you get real-time financials and close your books in real time. And over time, we are kind of building more into the vertical software stack, various things such as like invoicing, bill pay, inventory management. Our goal is to just kind of combine a lot of point solutions that e-commerce and CPG founders face today and put into one place. And so some of my background, just taking a step back, I'm from New York, worked on Wall Street for a couple of years, actually moved to San Francisco, lived there for almost 5 years, where I did tech investing at a private equity firm. And then after that, I joined a seed stage e-commerce aggregator. So worked a lot with small Shopify businesses. I led their finance and ops process. I diligenced and did M&A for all of it. So this idea stems a lot from a lot of the pain points that I faced personally, and hopefully will improve as time goes on.
Awesome. And whoops, I turned my mic off. And you knew your co-founder for quite some time, right? How did you all meet?
Yeah, we actually met at a summer internship in New York City. So we went to school together, and then we sat next to each other at this investment banking internship when I was a sophomore and when Julia was a freshman. And so it's a very full circle moment. We went separately in our different careers and kind of came back after like 8 years or something.
Awesome. Okay, so just to set the stage before your fundraise, before you started to say, hey, let's raise you're calling it a pre-seed round?
Yeah.
Where were you at as an organization? What was the decision like to start fundraising?
Yeah, it was a pretty, I guess, long and, circuitous process. I think for us, we always kind of want to do something together. And I think for me, moving to San Francisco and working at a startup, I always had this entrepreneurial itch. I just didn't really know what to do, but I think put in my sweat equity with working at the startup and learning how to be an operator in addition to being an investor. And so, we've been ideating ideas for a while. The business is not that old. It's probably 9 months at this time, but we've been ideating for a year or more, exploring different concepts. And so I think this one that DayZero is kind of formulated on comes a lot from my own pain points, and we kept coming back to it. We explored a lot of things like being a working capital provider to e-commerce businesses. We wanted to do something in government tech, and this one kind of always resonated, and thought it was a really good business model as well. So we did a lot of user calls in the beginning just to validate the idea, and I realized I was not singular in my experience doing it, and so Julia did most of them, to be honest, probably over 100. And then kind of put together a pitch and hit the market and see if there's appetite out there.
Got it. So you put together a pitch without having a working MVP, or was it you had a prototype, or were we in a product?
Yeah, we didn't. So Julie and I are both non-technical, but we thought that the idea, if it was validated enough, had some kind of institutional backing, could attract a lot of talent. And so that was kind of thought raising would help in that kind of way. And we spent time talking to a lot of like technical co-founders. We just haven't found the right fit.
Got it. And from maybe a more tactical perspective, how did you structure the fundraising process between the two of you in terms of like, how did you go about dividing and conquering or pulling together lists of VCs that you knew? How did you go about that initial process?
Yeah, I would be a lot more structured about it, knowing what I know now than what we did before. But we basically assigned one point of contact, which actually was Julia, to kind of be the main point of contact when it comes to fundraising. I think this is a good idea, just as a division of labor, and just consistency in kind of the message of the story that you're telling. And so what we did is actually we had, coming from Wharton, we had a lot of friends in the VC community, so we just started with them just to get some, I guess, advice on how to approach this kind of process. And then also talking with founders, we know a handful of them in San Francisco and New York City. So learning about it, you should do your research on every single firm out there. The stage of the firm is really important. If it's pre-seed, seed, Series A, not every single fund does the same stage. And you should find ones that have invested in your category before because they truly, really understand you and your product and your vision. And then make a list, or your top tier funds or your middle tier funds, who do you want to work with, and just be very targeted in kind of your outreach. And, it's important to just collect as much advice from everyone as possible. Because honestly, you have one chance at this. And yeah, I view it similar to interviewing. You can't really miss all the shots. So you gotta be prepared.
Got it. And when you, in your mind, how long were you going to give yourself time-wise to go through this fundraising process? Like, what was your ideal? Obviously, people want to close their round as quickly as possible, but what was realistic for you?
I actually don't even know this. I'm curious.
Yeah.
The honest answer is just we honestly thought about it as more opportunistic. If people were interested, we'll talk to them, maybe we'll evaluate. But then I think the process picked up very quickly, and there was actually a decent amount of interest within a week. And so first week is intro call, second week we get a little deeper, and then we're kind of done after that.
Great. And how did you come across Equal Ventures? Were they on that list that you put together?
No.
But they're like, if we get desperate, we will talk to Equal.
No, definitely not. No, it's really funny because being in San Francisco, obviously we have like friends at all different kind of venture capital firms, and so we had a friend that actually worked at Andreessen that introduced us to Chelsea and Rick. Rick is one of the partners at Equal, and he basically helped us developing the pitch, structuring it, and then he was like, here are like the 3 to 5 people that I think would really be helpful to you, and then Equal Ventures was on the top of that list. And so we did a first call. Chelsea actually sent us a deck that literally looked like our pitch deck. So she did a market map of the ecosystem that looked kind of like our pitch deck, and then we were like, this is a pretty good fit.
Great. Let's go over to Chelsea on your side. So talk me through the first contact, the first touch point that you had, and your first impressions of the team.
Yeah, 100%. And I think what Michelle said about understanding the fund is super, super critical because every single fund is very different. So I think it's important to know that for us, we are super thesis driven. Like this deck that I sent them, I think I made that a year before I met them, right? So because I only look at the space, I had a very strong POV and I was looking for something very, very specific. And actually, I probably had given up, to be honest, on I just thought we missed a moment of okay, if we didn't invest something in here, it would be too late at one point. So by then I had met maybe 40 different variations of this model. And then when I met them, I think it was very serendipitous. We were co-investors with this specific investor at Andreessen in a different company. So I think that also just helped because we knew him and trusted him. And then when I had met them, I think even in the first pitch, I was just Julia. And I would really recommend you guys do not have both founders on the pitch. I think it's just like a rookie mistake. It also like makes you kind of look like a rookie if you have both founders on the pitch. So it's just Julia. And I would say the first time you meet Julia, she's not like crazy, like, ooh, you know, like enthusiasm. Like she's not like crazy high energy. But I think because it was so close to what we wanted to invest in, it was just like a no-brainer for me to spend a little bit more time on the specific one, because I think it wasn't exactly the thesis, but it was definitely close enough where I thought it was really interesting. And then I think I had her meet Rick pretty like quickly, and I would say for us, if it's and this is a big difference between a lead investor and a non-lead investor. A lead investor is always going to want to move as fast as possible, right? Because for them, there's only one lead. So because we are only leading, I think our process probably only took 2-ish weeks. So it was really fast. Actually, it was supposed to go abroad, so I like changed my flight to meet them in Boston so we could get an in-person touch point. So I would say like from first meeting to term sheet probably was only 2 weeks, but it was really because we had such a strong thesis in the space, so we could move really quickly. And I think that's important thing to know.
Now, did you see a deck before you met, or did you first see the deck in the pitch when you first met?
So I think Joe Andreessen actually sent us the deck, or like we saw like an early version of the deck. And I would say like there are going to be investors who do mainly seed and they say they do pre-seed, but they don't really do pre-seed. I think we're like one of those, but because this was so on thesis for us, we were willing to go earlier here. And I think this is also something that I personally notice about investors. You fall in love either really quickly or really slowly, and then all at once. So I think for this one, it was definitely a very quick like, oh, I love it. And then emotionally, I like wanted to like it for all these other reasons because I already loved it. Versus there are other rounds that I think it's like more of a slower burn. But I do think for the pre-seed, you're probably more successful if you can catalyze that like quick falling in love with the investor.
Yeah, and was that when you saw the pitch or when you first met?
I think it's when we first met, and then after the second meeting with like me, her, and Rick, that was, I think when I was like, okay, like I think there's like a real investment opportunity there. And then I think like by then, like the process went pretty quickly.
And in that first meeting, just to really nail this point, because I think this is something as I work with, I've been on the investing side a bunch and I've coached founders. To me, the falling in love is like the first 1 or 2 slides. You already know you're going to dig in or not, or tune out.
Yes.
Would you agree with that? Like kind of
I totally agree. I would say, and unfortunately, there are some investors who are going to waste their time. Like that's just a fact of the industry. Yeah. But I would say most investors know fairly quickly, like, hey, is there a possibility or not? So I think I was already predisposed to like a lot of things about this specific opportunity because of the work that we had done. But I would say even after we met Julia, I think it was like, okay, then there's like could be a potential fit from a team perspective.
Yeah. Now, I think the analogy I use is like a movie. You watch a movie, the first opening scene. I always use Saving Private Ryan. I don't know if that's dating myself, but people have seen that movie, right? I mean, anyways, like the first scene is like, oh my God, it's like, this is unbelievable. And I don't even know what the rest of the movie's about, but it hits you so hard. You're just like invested. And it's very much kind of tends to be that same thing. Passing it back to Michelle, what was, after your co-founder went through that first pitch, what did you hear, and like kind of walk me through what that was like if you remember? Or it could have been uneventful. It could have been one of 100 meetings. It's okay. It's like
actually we're very fast at following up.
Yeah.
So I think Rick was like, I like this, let's do another meeting. And then I got forwarded the message and I was like, and then Chelsea's like, are you guys able to meet tomorrow? So
yeah. Yeah.
We're in 2 days. So I was like, okay, that one went really well. So, and then Chelsea sent us her thesis deck. And then I I actually did a little more research on Equal. I think this is very important. You should read the blog posts that these investors are writing because that is very thematic of what they're researching. So every single quarter or half a year or a year, I think each investor probably covers a certain space and there's a certain theme. And it just happened to be like the right time that it was just all coinciding because Rick had written stuff about vertical software, Chelsea had written stuff about supply chain and commerce. And so.
And were they the first investor to really dig in and start moving the ball forward, or were there others?
There was a couple others.
Yeah.
So that's why being in a process is really important because you never want to get to the end of the finish line and no one else can catch up.
Yeah, tell me about that because it's a lot of momentum game, right? It's a lot of this person's kind of in, then leveraging that to wrangle more people. And what were some of those tricks you did to get that momentum so all the conversations ended somewhat similarly?
These are a couple tricks. You show up late to the meeting a little bit, and you say, sorry, I just have a very busy calendar. I think it works. Did it work?
So we actually, here, give me this. So we do a lot of coaching, right? Because we only invest in 4 companies. We do a lot of help on follow-on fundraising. And I think a couple like very dumb things that help. One, if you do want there to be a process, befriend the VCs after you meet them, because then other VCs will see that you have a ton of mutuals and just assume that you're like hot. That actually does really help. I think timing the process, I think you guys probably did a good job there, but I will say it's also just like, sometimes does come to luck, but you really do not want one fund that you like to get too far ahead. Because if that's the case, you just can't, you're just not going to be able to be in a process, because if a fund you love is like 2 weeks ahead of everyone else, their term sheets explode in like 24 hours, right? That's like standard. So if the fund that you love is like 24 hours, like 2 weeks ahead and no one else is even closed, you really have no negotiating power on pricing. Whereas with them, I think, did you guys get the term sheet after us or before? I forget. Sure. It was like around the same time. So they got like a second term sheet, and then I was already on vacation in Italy, but I like spent first 3 days of my vacation. My boyfriend was so pissed actually, but I spent like the first 3 days trying to negotiate with them because they had leverage, right? They had a different term sheet that was there, and I think that's like something that's really, really helpful for the founders to have a second option.
Any other tricks?
Yeah, I think it's really important to be prepared when you do a process, and sometimes you might go into it, especially for us, it was a little early. I mean, it's a pre-seed, right? You really need to be structured. You need to have your list of like different VCs, and you need to send all your emails. There's like a first email, or actually someone else will send it on your behalf. So warm intros are really important. You actually never want to cold outreach to a VC because that just looks a little desperate. So you need to befriend people in the industry that will warm intro you to the people that you want to talk to. But you need to stage it. On Monday, he's going to send it out. He might like text and back channel. But you kind of want everyone to move at the same pace. Otherwise, you're going to get to the finish line if you only have one term sheet. That's, you're either deciding whether you're going to take VC funding or not at that point. And the VCs can also kind of sense that as well because they ask questions.
Okay, great. And Chelsea, going back to you, you mentioned that a lot of what they were building was already in line with the thesis that you all have. But when you think about due diligence at a pre-seed level, what things besides alignment on that, which seems like it was already there, do you do at that very early stage?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm going to be a little bit too honest here. I think at the pre-seed, because it's so early, it is very much the investor has to fall in love with you as an individual. And if they love you, they will do a lot of the work on your behalf on diligence, right? Because like, again, what was there to diligence, right? Like there's not much. Like we had the idea, and like ideas change all the time, right? So even if pre-investment you're aligned, doesn't mean that's ultimately the company that you're going to be investing in, right? Because it happens all the time that a pre-seed company will pivot. So I think what's really, really important for us is like making sure we did enough back channeling on these two as individuals. And we did do a lot of that. Like, obviously you talk to mutuals. We like talk to some folks on Apollo that work with Julia. We have like a lot of like personal mutuals that I hit up. So I think that was more of the diligence that we did was on these two as individuals. Because again, for us, it's a little bit more rare. We really didn't have to do any market work just because we had already done so much market work before. But that's not true for every single fund, right? There are other funds that are much more generalist where they're going to have to go and do the market work. And then you as the founders, you should be helping your investor understand the market as well. But that's just like a component that wasn't the case in this particular opportunity.
Got it. So what about founders who aren't coming? In this case, there were a lot of maybe mutual connections and relationships that you could kind of due diligence. But what about founders that are coming from industry or other backgrounds that you might have a harder time getting a sense? How much of it just a sense of like, these are the right people, and they can make it happen?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I will say I kind of see two types of founders be the most successful in pre-seed. I would say the first type, which I would say candidly these two are not, are like ones from industry, like pure industry. Like you spent, let's say I'm investing in a retail company, you spent 10, 15 years in retail tech, and you have some like innate insight to win, right? And I think that is, if you have that, you can tell a very powerful story without the access, right? And I would say these two probably had like, asymmetrical access to the investor base just because they already had a lot of friends who were in VC. But I think it all comes down to you as a founder. What is your asymmetrical story? Like, what is the thing that makes you pop or makes you shine? It's not going to be the same for everyone, right? Like, everyone's going to have their own unique thing. But I think really understanding the one or two things that's going to be really appealing about you to investors and like really going hard on that will be probably the most successful.
Okay, great. Now you mentioned the negotiation and spending time, that intense period of negotiation. What would you say are like were the important points? And you can talk more generally. You don't have to talk about the specific deal that you're looking to negotiate. And this question is for both of you. What are the things that were important to you, or that you want to make sure you cover off on or push
on? I'd say just like being prepared to understand what a safe node, or even if it's a price round, what a price round, like what the different items are on the letter, because everyone knows the valuation and how much equity you're giving up, but there's also probably 7 other things that you probably don't think about. So there are a lot of good resources that are online now, especially from Y Combinator, that kind of lists a lot of different things like board rights, you have performer rights, consent laws, you need approvals from your investors to do certain things. So I think those are more like the hard things that are important to research beforehand that actually you get pretty deep into, and actually spend a lot less time on the headline values, but more into the weeds, because it actually determines the cadence of how you interact with your investor and your employees down the line. And I think just more softly, it's also understanding like the type of investor that you're partnering with. So Equal is actually very unique in that they're very hands-on. So that means like me, Julia, Chelsea have a weekly sync, and we do like monthly strategy sessions. And for me, I really appreciate these sessions because I, as an investor in my past, have done a lot of similar things. Like we were very hands-on as a private equity firm, and I think there are small ways and big ways investors can add value, and I think this is a pretty large way, in addition to a lot of other things that they can do as well, which I think we'll talk about in a bit. But
yeah, I think if you're going to do the standard save, the YC save, like then you don't really have to worry about much. I would say for us, because we generally do a price round, they really want to do a save. I was like, fine, but that means we had to do a side letter. So then we did have to go through and like negotiate the side letter, and then like obviously you have like then lawyers have to like get involved and like discuss the side letter. So it really just depends. I would encourage for anyone who's like only doing a pre-seed, if you're going to do the safe and your investor's okay with the safe, just do that, right? Like it's pretty standard. But once you're getting into a price round territory, you do want to have some legal advice, just because there's like a lot of stuff that unless you know what is standard versus not standard, you won't really know unless you have a lawyer who can actually advise you on the right things.
Great. Now that after the investment is made, for both of you, how do you interact with each other now that you have made the investment? Maybe Chelsea, we'll start with you. How do you support the founder, and what kind of interactions do you have?
Yeah, for sure. And again, very transparently, we're very hands-on. So I'm always trying to make sure that I'm being additive and not just an extra meeting on their calendar. So we do weekly check-ins. And those are much more, I feel processed tactfully. But then I think sometimes if I feel there needs to be a heavier discussion, we'll do a longer strategy session. So we did that actually maybe 2 weeks ago, and I thought that was, good to right size some stuff. But I think for us, it's also letting them have the space to actually go and figure stuff out. Because again, pre-seed, whatever the stage you're in is very different than the traditional seed. So it also just depends on the company. But I would say for these, we probably text each other every 1 or 2 days. I think as the investor, it's much more important for me to let them know that I'm there for them. Any question, they can just text me anytime. And I think that's probably the most important thing at the stage of the company.
Yeah, Michelle, for you, what that question, but also of the other investors, you have other investors as well. What type of interactions do you find to be the most value additive or helpful from investors? How can they help you best?
Yeah, I think there are a handful of ways. Chelsea has a consulting background, so she is very good at frameworks. So she often challenges us to, think a little bit more methodically about how to approach certain big business situations. But in addition, since Equal and our other co-investors are pretty basically experts in the space, they know a lot of brands, whether there are adjacent companies making adjacent products that sell to similar customer bases, or even they themselves have invested in our ICP. These introductions to fellow founders or even brands as potential customers, or even just feedback, is really important and really helpful because it actually can unlock a lot of value that otherwise you're just going to be cold calling people and no one's going to answer. So that, in addition to just hiring in general, is really important. So everyone knocks on Chelsea's door to get funding, and so she sees a lot of different people, and sometimes they're able to connect the dots between mutual interests, mutual life stages, and kind of pass good talents from person to person.
Okay, great. I have 2 more questions, then we're going to do about 10 minutes questions from the audience. So if you have a question, get yourself ready. Just to wrap up, Michelle, we'll start with you. What's kind of the best piece of advice that you've received or have gotten during the process, and that you would give to founders when they're fundraising, besides what you've already kind of mentioned?
Yeah. I think it's just really important just to talk to as many people as possible. It could feel a very singular experience, and I think I said this a lot, but it's really tough building something, especially from zero. It gets easier over time as you get more momentum, but literally starting and pitching a multi-billion-dollar idea and you don't have anything, it's you kind of be a little delusional. But it's important because everyone who starts something believes in themselves a lot, and you should talk to these people, and they'll be your biggest cheerleaders because they have gone through the same stuff you've gone through, and there are not a lot of people out there that are like that, but you can find them, you can search them out, right? Amongst your friend groups, how many people are founders? Probably not that many, but that's why you talk to VCs, that's why you try to make friends, you come to these networking events. It's really important because they're there to provide you advice, so in 6 months you don't make the same mistakes that they make.
Great. And Chelsea, for you get pitched a lot from founders. Maybe you can just tell a little bit about the mistakes that you see founders make, but also the things that founders do that are fantastic during a fundraising process.
Yeah, I will say I think founders often don't understand that, or I think they don't understand how sometimes it's really not about you as a founder. It's about the fit, right? So a lot of times, depending on who you're talking to at a VC fund, like sometimes they're just like looking to fill up time. So they'll talk to you even if they already know you're not a fit, which again, that's like very bad behavior. They shouldn't be doing that, but like it does happen a lot. But I think that's why a lot of times like pitch meetings are happening when the other person knows there's like no chance of investment, right? Because like this industry, the information asymmetry is like crazy, right? Like investors know a lot of stuff, and like you as a founder don't know that much about like what the dynamics are, which is why I would say at a high level, I totally agree with Michelle. I think you should be just talking and having as many conversations as possible to try to gather information, right? And that's like across a lot of things. It's like, one, what are the funds that are right for me, right? And you can talk to a bunch of people, other founders or people in the industry, or like a lot of times, even if you ask an investor who passed on you, on why you're not a fit, or that you ask for intros to people who are better fits, like that can be a much better way to get information on who could be, you know, the right type of investor for you. And I would say too, also like getting more comfortable with hearing no. And I think that's a very hard thing for like, you know, I know for these two to hear, right? Because like just like it, a lot of founders have like traditionally been very, very successful before they start a company, and then you start a company, you hear no every single day, and you're like, wow, this is like I suck, right? But like I think you again like try to think about the flip side of like, again, it's really often not about you, right? Like just because someone doesn't invest in you or doesn't use your product is not a reflection on the validity of what you're building. It just means that you haven't found the right investor or the right customer yet. And I think that those two things are probably will go a long way into making your fundraising process more successful, because I think it'll just, one, be more efficient, but two, you'll probably be able to take the no's with you know less hit to the emotional ego, which I know fundraising is just very tough right now, especially in this market. So I think those are probably the two biggest advice I would give to founders right now.
Great. Let's go to the questions in the audience over here.
But in the meantime, I've been having these like just intro meeting investors, mostly outreach from them, or like that invested this, and then follow up with an intro, and I qualify with like, we're not actively fundraising, we're looking to fundraise in the summer. You're saying like it's just like one shot, where like you gotta like do this all at once. But are those like intro meetings fine? Like I guess like am I shooting myself in the foot by doing these?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I will say, I generally think intro meetings are fine. I just wouldn't give folks any metrics to peg to, right? Because I would say with pre-seed, again, you're so early that there's not much due diligence, right? Because like, again, they're falling in love with like you and the momentum and like this narrative that you're telling. It's very different than like Series A and beyond, where like numbers actually matter. So I do think in pre-seed, it's kind of like dating, right? When you go on a first good date, you're like, wow, I love this guy. Like, I don't know anything bad about him. He's amazing, right? Like, that's kind of like pre-seed, right? Like the first time they meet you before they know anything else about you, that's when they're gonna like you the most. So I would say for the intro calls, just keep them high level. It's totally okay to have them. I just wouldn't like peg yourself to any crazy goals, right? Because of course, in the next, like for example, you're like, oh, we're gonna launch in 2 weeks. We already have 100 customers on the waiting list. Like, let's say you tell me that, and then a month later you're raising, and you talk to me again. Of course, I'm gonna be like, well, do you have 100 customers? You probably don't, right? So like, I think that's where you want to be a little bit more careful, is that when you're that early, you're just not going to be at a place where you can count on true traction yet. So you just don't want to set yourself up to fail, right? Versus later stage, you really have to prove to investors, hey, I told you I'm going to do this, and I did it, right? So I think that's how I would think about it. Like, definitely warm the relationship, but don't spend too much time with investors before you're ready to raise.
Any other questions? Maddie.
I have a very we are just in a stage to raise our
Mhm.
stake, but some are just like convertible notes, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Is combining them okay? Like you as an investor, I mean, about this,
Yeah, I mean, I think with all things, convertible notes are fine if they're standard. There are some weird convertible notes, so I think it really depends on what the terms are. Like some people do try to do like weird shit with them, so I would just be careful. I think if it's pre-seed, it's fine. Like we see that a lot. A lot of like you'll just convert everything the next time you have a price round, but just make sure there's like nothing weird. Like I've seen like there's some convertible notes that like there's like monthly interest rates and like things like that. Like I think that's like a little bit weird, but I would just use your judgment there.
and then combining them is okay.
I think it's okay if it's like standard. Yeah, I think if the terms are standard, it shouldn't be crazy. But again, just like be careful, and I would just make sure you're getting, if it's gonna be a convertible note, just have a lawyer look at it.
Great. Question in the back.
Yeah, and just a bit more on the fund side. I'm curious because you're taking some checks. It's not like a lot of funds where you pay a bunch a year and all that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering how much have you been affected the last years?
Yep. Yeah, that's a good question. So for us, because we were always 4 checks a year, we haven't really been affected. That's obviously not true for everyone. I think the market is like fine, always been fine for pre-seed and seed, right? Because so I think there's money out there. I do think you have to be a little bit careful about who has cash versus who doesn't. Actually, there's a very easy way to check because every single fund, if they're like a legit fund, will do SEC filings. So you can actually see exactly how much they raised and when they raised. So for us, like you can go and see how much we raised and like when we raised the first one. So like that's actually a very easy way without asking anyone on like, hey, does this fund have cash to deploy or not? You hear horror stories about like funds claiming they have cash, but they don't. I feel like that's like probably the minority. I feel like most people don't do that. Like if they don't have cash, they just like won't be talking to founders. But I do think like if most of the investors I know that if they're actively meeting founders, they do have capital to invest.
Question up here.
That's a great tip. I didn't know that funds need to file SEC filings.
Yeah, and then the key is that you need to go down and it says how much they've actually sold and the target. So sometimes there's a funds that are like, oh, we want to sell 100 million and they've only sold 5 million. So then that means they've only raised 5 out of the 100. So they actually also have to tell you like how much they've raised at the time of filing as well.
And my question is, so I just read the thesis of your fund, transform legacy industries, and sometimes that involves hardware. But what's your perspective on hardware? Do you invest in hardware? And to me, like Square is a hardware company.
Yep.
They started as a hardware company. Without the hardware, they cannot have
Right.
a ongoing revenue.
Yeah. So I think if like there's a component of hardware, I think that's okay for us. If the innovation itself is like hardware, then it's tough. Just because like I would say our team is not smart enough to underwrite hardware. There are really great hard tech funds out there that do understand hardware. I mean, we don't have a single engineer on our team, so I don't think you would want us to be investing in like real hardware companies. So that's our perspective, but I do think there are really great hardware funds out there who can, understand that type of technology and innovation.
So you would invest in the next Square.
I mean, I would love to invest in the next Square. Like 100%. Like Toast, right? There's like a hardware component to Toast. That would be great.
Question in the back. Yeah, that's a good question. So if there's anything that's ever competitive, we ask our existing founders, or like even potentially competitive. We actually have them blocked before. Like there have been companies we wanted to invest in that our existing founder was like, we think this is too competitive. So for us, because we have pretty high ownership targets, we just like
err on this side of safety rather than not. But there are other funds who like don't, and I think it just like depends on the fund strategy.
Okay, any last questions? One last one.
Yeah, first, thank you very much for helpful and interesting. Just to hear about your perspective of the investment in A versus B2C. You guys a lot of press comment, although the reward might be much higher. So, share about that.
Yeah, that's a great question. I will say B2C is another space that I just don't think my team and me are like, we're just not smart enough to invest in B2C. I think B2C is so much harder to invest in, and there are really, really great B2C investors. We have invested in B2B2C companies before, but I think for us, we're just not a fund that understands the consumer acquisition piece as critically as I think you need to do to be a successful consumer investor. So we generally stay out of the space. But again, I think you can make a lot of money building B2C companies. It's just not a space that I think we feel intelligent enough to make bets in.
Awesome. Well, let's not. Shai, did you have last comment? Yeah. Oh, I was just saying, let's give our speakers a round of applause. Thank you so much.